I always found it funny that Doc takes Marty across 100 years of time and almost threatens all of existence, but yet Marty's kids are the problem. What is going on, guys? Welcome to the James Walker Show and my review of Back to the Future Part 2, which is once again directed by Robert Zemeckis and written by Bob Gale. It stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, and Thomas F. Wilson. Now, this film picks up where the first one immediately left off, with Doc and Marty jumping in the time-traveling DeLorean and having an adventure across time. One of the things that has always fascinated me about the Back to the Future series is how it wasn't supposed to happen. Robert Zemeckis stated that he never intended for a sequel to be made, let alone an entire franchise. The ending of Back to the Future Part 1, with Doc showing up in the now flying DeLorean, was just kind of put in there as a joke. And Robert Zemeckis said he never would have intended for a sequel or had that lead into a sequel because he never would have put the girlfriend in the car, because now that becomes a huge obstacle. But when you have a film as successful as Back to the Future was, then that becomes a product. And people want to take that product and expand upon it. And they want to turn that product into a franchise and take that into the future. No pun intended. Actually, no pun intended. That was a pretty good one. In my review of the first Back to the Future, I talked about how that film felt like it was being made on the fly. That it was a film that was constantly changing. And Back to the Future Part 2 kind of has a similar feeling. You feel like they were going to go in one direction, but then for one reason or another went in another direction. And I think a large part of that had to do with the casting. Initially, the filmmakers would only return to a sequel if the original cast would return as well. Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd both said yes. Leah Thompson said yes. Thomas F. Wilson said yes. Crispin Glover was a different story, though. The original idea was for Doc and Marty to travel to the 1960s and meet Marty's parents while they were in college. But that kind of changed, I think, whenever Crispin Glover decided not to return. Now, whether it was because of money or morals or whatever, the reason he didn't come back has often been debated. But I think what that did is it got rid of the whole 1960s subplot in general. But somewhere along the way, the filmmakers had this interesting idea of going back to the 1955 setting, the setting from the first Back to the Future. And what that did is it created an interesting opportunity from a visual and storytelling perspective. Because now you can go back to the first film and see events happen from a different perspective. And it also created an interesting viewing experience, because now you can watch the first Back to the Future and you're looking for Marty and Doc kind of running around in the background. Do you ever see them? No, but it's still fun trying to find them. But one of the things I like about this alternate timeline that the film sets up is it gives the actors an interesting opportunity to play the same character through different time periods and different circumstances. This isn't like Michael J. Fox playing his son or his daughter. Those are two completely different characters. But if you look at actors like Leah Thompson and Thomas F. Wilson, who had to play the same character through different timelines under different circumstances, I thought that was a really neat and interesting idea. And it works really well because the acting in this film is fantastic. Every actor gives a superb performance in this film. And I think the best aspect of Back to the Future Part 2 are the performances. Christopher Lloyd gives an amazing performance in this. So much of the story and plot rests on his shoulders, and he doesn't miss a beat. There is so much exposition given by Doc, telling Marty, this is why you can't do that. This is why this happened. This is why we have to go forward. This is why we can't go back. This is why things are the way that they are. And he doesn't miss a beat. He gives 110% every time he is on screen. Part of the biggest appeal of Back to the Future Part 2, though, is its depiction of the future. Robert Zemeckis stated that he never wanted to visit the future because every version of the future that has been done in film is always wrong. Even Stanley Kubrick got the future wrong. And the future has always been depicted as a kind of dystopian wasteland, a place that you do not want to live, a place where you don't want to be. Every version of the future has always been bleak. But what Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale did is they decided to kind of turn it into a joke and make the future an uplifting place, a place where you did want to live. And if there was anything wrong with the future, it wasn't because of technology, but it was because of the people living in it. And Back to the Future Part 2's future is a good environment. It is a future that I want to be a part of, I want to live in. However, I do think that that is the biggest drawback to the film. The first film was very much a story about people, choices, and consequences. It relied very little on hardware or technology, whereas Back to the Future 2 is so much of it is eye candy. There's so much special effects in there that I think kind of takes away from the consequences and actions that these characters make. There are consequences for actions and arcs that characters have to go on. However, I felt that wasn't as weighty as the first one because so much of this film dealt with time paradoxes and the DeLorean, the hardware. There's also some things in Back to the Future 2 that are never addressed that I always kind of felt needed to be addressed. For instance, where is the 2015 version of Doc? He's never mentioned. Does he go into the future? Does he know what's going on with the McFlys? Has he tried to help? That aspect is never addressed in the film. Also, if you look at Back to the Future 2 as a whole, the whole film is seen through Marty's eyes. He's the only character we're with 100% of the time. Doc we tend to lose for large periods of time for unknown reasons. We don't know where he is, we don't know what he's doing, and it's questions that we just kind of have to take at face value for the sake of the film. One of the great things the film does, though, is it sets up arcs for what's coming. You can watch Back to the Future Part 1 and watch it as a standalone film. You can watch it without having to watch Part 2 or Part 3. But if you watch Part 2, you have to watch Part 3 because there are things set up in Part 2 that are delivered in Part 3. And it's important to the resolution of the series as a whole. So Back to the Future Part 2 is a great middle chapter. Do I think it's as good as Part 1? Not necessarily, but there's some great performances in there and some setups that really pay off in the next installment in Back to the Future Part 3. But I'm going to give Back to the Future Part 2 4 flux capacitors. You guys, thank you so much for watching. For more reviews, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. And as always, I will see you in the next episode.